Well, I want to welcome everybody to our November Eye on Piscataway here at 2022. And we have actually just one guest this evening on the show. We're sort of going to do an exit interview of Councilman Steve Cahn, talk about his 20-plus years on the Township Council and a lot of the initiatives that he was involved in over the years and how things have transformed within Piscataway Township and some of the major ideas that he thought we would accomplish. And he also has a book that he just recently wrote that is being promoted out there, and we'll talk a little bit briefly about that. But more importantly is November happens to be the month where we celebrate folks, the men and women in the armed forces, for Veterans Day, which recently just happened out there. And Steve, you were in the Marine Corps. Right. For a number of years, and it was you cherished those years that you were in the Marine Corps. You wanted to talk a little bit about the Marine Corps?
Sure. This was the 247th birthday of the Marine Corps. Marine Corps service is unique. I don't know of any other service that has a national holiday for the founding of the service, but I was wise enough to, or fortunate enough to join the Marine Corps in 1983 and served for a little over 8 years in the Marine Corps. I was a captain when I got out. I was primarily a lawyer in the Marine Corps, but I also got to do some other stuff. I was a company commander. I was stationed in Europe with NATO for a while. It was a tremendous, really just a tremendous experience to serve the country in that manner. As a relatively young person, you think you're old and experienced, but I was in my 20s, late 20s when I, did all those things. So it was really just a great experience.
And to this day, you still keep in touch with folks that you served with.
I still, the internet makes it easier now than it used to be, but I still keep in touch with a number of the folks I served with. A lot of them have become very successful. Several of them are judges. Several work at the Pentagon. Some teach. One teaches at Georgetown. Some work in Congress. They've all real successful, but we all keep in contact. We had a big reunion this summer out in Pennsylvania. It was well attended. Probably more than 20 former Marine Corps officers were there, their families. It was just a great experience, and we had during COVID, somebody came up with the creative idea of having a COVID cocktail party on Zoom. I mean, Zoom cocktail party. So you've got guys all over the country, as far away as Houston and Las Vegas. Here we all are on Zoom, having a toast to the Marine Corps. It was interesting.
Well, depending upon what time of the day you were having it on the Eastern Seaboard, it may have been very early out on the West Coast.
Well, it was eight on the or 2000 hours Marine Corps time on the East Coast. So I'm not sure what Vegas is off there, West Coast or
West
Mountain
Coast,
time.
Yeah.
But just a great experience, to serve the country. I was watching. I didn't get to watch any NFL football, but I was at the community center, and they had on the pregame show, and I saw. All the celebrities on Fox Sports, and they were with troops at an Air Force base. And I was looking at the troops, and they're all so young, and forgot, I was once that young. But here these folks were, and they're all around the world, serving America's interests in places that most of us have never heard of, and sure as heck will never visit. It's really challenging, to be deployed. I was young, I wasn't married, but when you get folks that get deployed like that, you don't realize you see somebody and you say, well, they're in Kuwait, they're in Afghanistan, they're in, in the DMZ and up in Korea. There's families at home, there's moms, there's kids, and it's a tremendous challenge for them to do that. So Veterans Day is a great day to honor all those that have done that, and those that are out there now doing it for this country.
Yeah. And I think it's very interesting in this day and age with the dynamics of what's going on in the world. There's more forward deployment now of U.S. forces than there were at any time, I believe, in the last 30 to 40 years now, going into countries that they've never been to.
Yeah, I mean, when I went into the Marine Corps and was in, training to become an infantry officer, you studied traditional places that the military had been, and we didn't know how to spell some of the places that they are now. The world's changed dramatically, but the all-volunteer force is the military's never been smarter or more capable. People are very well trained, very intelligent. So we have a lot of technology. And, we're in those places to prevent situations from happening, and we're very successful at it.
Yeah. So with that, you were involved in the Marines, and you served your time on 2 tours, I believe it was.
Well, I was a little over 8 years. As an officer, you don't really sign up for a tour.
Yeah.
Peacetime, you just sign up, and they say you serve at the pleasure of the president until the president either had enough of you or you resign or retire.
So you come back. You grew up in Edison, and you get married. You made Piscataway your home with your family, and you got involved governmentally and politically here. And then you actually, believe it or not, Steve Cahn is the only person in the history of the town who was both elected as the 2nd Ward councilman and then the 3rd Ward councilman, because the census in 2000. So you served for a little over 2 years as the 2nd Ward councilman, which at that time was the Possumtown-Wynwood area.
Right.
And then you became the third Ward councilman right there. So you were only one in the history of the town that actually served in 2 different positions on the town council. 2 different ones.
Well, I don't know the history of the town as well as you do, but I'll say I took a job in Piscataway when I got out of the Marine Corps at a law firm. It was Frank Rubin's, Dave Rubin's firm at the 501 Hose Lane building. I went to Rutgers, so I lived in Piscataway, before. How I got involved, you know the story, but how I got involved was I then loved the town, having working here for a year or 2, bought a house. I've been here over 32 years. But there was a park up the street from where I lived in the Possumtown area, that Wynwood Park. It wasn't much more than a cow pasture at the time. And I thought, boy, that park and some of the others have great possibility. Who the heck's in charge? Who's in charge of the show? So I saw that you were the 2nd Ward councilman, and I called you up. I introduced myself, and we were both a lot younger. You came over, which I thought was pretty interesting. That if I can make a phone call and the councilman will come on over to my house, and you came over, and we walked over to the park, and you already had ideas for it. It was you and I walked around and you pointed out, we can do this, we can do that. And I thought it was, great vision. It was even beyond what I thought. And I was encouraged, boy, I'd like to get involved in this. And I guess you took a chance and decided maybe we'll let this former Marine, get involved a little bit. And I think you put me on the Environmental Advisory Commission and in the Sports and Recreation Advisory Commission, and I kind of got involved from there. So end of this year will be 22 years on the town council.
It just seems like it was yesterday.
It does. In fact, one of the things you did when I first got on the town council is when the same time you were elected mayor. So we started at the same time, even though you were a councilman. Is that you created this Eye on Piscataway show. They didn't have it before, and you're going to do it live. And it was me, you, and Jim Euban, who was a councilman at large over. He lived over in the Maplehurst Farms section of town. He's moved down to Charlotte. We're going to do the first live show, and it was like I had never done live television. I didn't know what we were going to do, and I remember we talked about, well, how should we prepare for the show? What are we going to do? And you were like, don't worry about it. We're just going to get up and talk to the residents, and it was an interesting experience, and it went pretty well. I can't remember what we talked about so long ago, but we probably talked about what we wanted to do starting off, because Jim was a brand new councilman.
That's correct.
Councilman as well. you had been on the council for a number of years, but essentially the three of us were all new to the roles we were in. And so I assume we talked about what we wanted to do. We all had some exciting ideas, but the show was a success. Residents called in, and it went from there. And I guess this show's been on the air for 22 years.
Yep, that's basically it. And I want to go back to.
It's like Meet the Press.
Yeah, there you go. I want to go back to for a couple minutes back when you just spoke about the parks. I remember as a kid growing up in town that I don't know if people ever remember the old merry-go-round.
Yeah.
And I always remember we were roughhousing in the park one day over Wynwood Park because I grew up with a lot of the kids over in that area, and it got thrown under the merry-go-round as it was going. Now, anybody who knows that is quite a dangerous piece of equipment going around and you get your head clocked.
I don't think they even make them
No,
anymore.
they don't make it because no insurance company would ever insure it down to put them in there. And I always made it my mind that, if I ever get into a position to change something, I wanted to reinvent a lot of the parks in town because, no matter what your age is, you should have decent parks. And under your tenure on the town council, not only have the town governing body members reinvented all the parks, but twice because of your term on office, every 10-year period, you go back in and refresh all the parks. So now Wynwood Park, when you originally took me over, not only did we originally get playground equipment, safe playground equipment, but now it has morphed into, it has a basketball court, it has a tennis court, it has a pickleball court,
Right.
It has a jogging path, it has a baseball, and it has a very, very nice playground component to it with parking and stuff for the neighborhood.
It's a first-rate
Yeah.
community park. If you go there in the summertime, I mean, I don't live in that neighborhood anymore, but I have a lot of friends that do. They had a pickleball tournament, like a league that they set up within the community.
Within the neighborhood,
The kids would play, the adults would play, and it went on all summer. And it really was what we had envisioned is that these parks are a place where the community can come together. And not just for recreation, but the idea of meeting your neighbors and talking to your neighbors, and it becomes more of a community. And I suspect you already had the idea in mind, but when you became mayor, you set as one of the goals to redo every single park in town. And if you took a look around, and we all went around and looked at the different parks, there were some good things, but clearly there were a lot of things that needed tremendous improvement. First of all, most of them really were not what you would call handicapped accessible. And that was something that, over 20 years ago, that wasn't as much of an emphasis for local governments. It was the law and all those things, but local governments really weren't saying, we got to really push forward and make our community more handicapped accessible. And you set that as a goal. And we started improving all the parks in town, and made a huge difference, I think, in the quality of people's lives in town, is that they have their little local neighborhood.
Well, also now that parents can let their kids go to the local parks and they know that it'll be a safe environment. But if you think about it, I remember over in the Wynwood Park there was always some pushback not to put some of the amenities in because you had some longtime families that backed up to the park, and to a certain degree they viewed it as their private property behind their house. But the truth of the matter is it is public parkland, and we still have some of that to this day in certain sections of town that the folks view the park as their personal venue, and they don't necessarily want other individuals coming in and actually use the park. But we're slowly reinventing all the parks. Like for instance, next year we're hoping to, add some handicap accessibility parking over at Deborah Drive Tot Lot across from Holmes Marshall Firehouse, because you have folks that are wheelchair bound, kids that come in there, and there's no way for them to safely go up and actually use the park. So we're slowly picking at a lot of these parks. What may seem like some minor thing to you and I or to some other folks is a huge issue for families that have to deal with handicap accessibility. And it's the right thing to do governmentally too.
Well, I'll give you an example without using any names. There's a handicapped gentleman in town that lots of folks know who is wheelchair bound but has a electric wheelchair, and he's out and about all the time. Many people
Yeah.
know him and have seen him around town. And the fact that the town has been made and the county road network has been made handicap accessible has opened up a whole new world to him and to others, so he can,
Get around town a
I've
little.
seen him miles from his home,
Yeah.
because he has access to get up onto, before he couldn't get up on a curb, he couldn't, safely navigate a broken sidewalk, and so, well, that's just one individual, I think the one thing I learned the most in 22 years is that local government actually really works. People complain all the time about Washington and government being, broken, and there's goodness so many problems that I wouldn't know where to begin fixing them. But most of this country is run on local government. Cities and towns, and the cities and towns work and can really get things done for people. Just those little things about fixing parks and making things handicapped accessible. Fixing the roads. Those things are all, they're not really political. I mean,
No.
I remember years ago at a council meeting, there was a debate with some local Republican activists about our philosophy on, paving, on plowing the roads. And I remember saying to them, is there a Republican versus Democratic way of moving snow? I mean, we're just trying to move the snow. But I think that's why local government works, is because that, we all live in the community and we're all part of the community, and, it's really the way things get done.
Well, and it's like you shop locally, you run into families. People want to stop you. They may necessarily not want to send you an email or pick up the phone and call, but if they see you in person, in the store, they'll grab your ear for a second and say, hey, listen, I may have a small issue. Could you take a look into it? And that's sort of like what happens to us as local officials.
Right.
It's really the neighborhood touch, so to speak. And general public, to a certain extent, doesn't understand it necessarily in this day and age. But
Well, for example, and a lot of people, it's a big town, but I think a lot of people in town feel they really know you because they see you, because you're very out in the public. And for many years, you did all the food shopping in your house.
I still do.
There are multiple reasons why we won't get into. But I remember you once explaining to me, I get up and go to ShopRite because that's where I get to talk to people.
Yeah.
And people see you and know you, and I mean you.
by the way, I want to give a public information card, 8 o'clock Sunday mornings at ShopRite Delicatessen.
Right. So if you have an issue with the town, do your grocery shopping at ShopRite at 8 o'clock. It's a plug for local ShopRite, at least for now anyway. But, I mean, I go to ShopRite and I know the store inside out. I'm in and out of there in 15, 20 minutes. What does it take you, 2.5, 3 hours to shop?
I do have a rule after I leave the delicatessen. If you want to speak with me, the carts always must be moving.
Yeah.
So
No, but it is true, and I'm not usually there that early, but I've seen you in the store on numerous occasions, and people feel like they know you, and many do, and they come up to you and communicate what their issues are. That's just one example,
So we talked a little bit about just now about how the parks, and now, we're going to sort of go along these lines. When you first got reelected to the township governing body back in 2002, and we had talked about having a community center,
Right.
and bringing it is, and it took a long time for us to get there. There was a lot of ups and downs going along the way. But it has now that the building has been built, and it has morphed into probably better than what we originally anticipated.
Oh, yeah.
Meaning now you have 11,000 plus members of our community involved in that building, and it has really changed the whole dynamics of the town, and has ironically become a selling point for real estate in town, like people, if they're selling their houses or looking to buy,
Right.
How close are you to the community center?
Right.
And the services? And you, as a councilman, had a lot to do with that, with the design and the thought process of what we wanted to get done over there. Do you want to speak a few minutes about the chronological history of how long it took us and why? And believe me, you and I, there was times that we were upset and we thought we'd never get it over the finish line.
Well, you know, the concept of a community center had been around for, you know, I bet, you know, certainly when Ted Light was mayor, and I think even when Senator Smith was the mayor, it was a different concept. It was expanding the youth center. It was, you know, a boys girls club. There were different ideas around. Reverend Saunders had some ideas when he was on the town council. And somehow in a discussion, you know, we came up with, you know, a community center. It's funny because I have a lot of, and you do too, because we had lots of, you know, concept drawings over the years. It's almost like the old Disney World concept drawings. And it's smaller, it's bigger, it's smaller, it's sideways, it's taller, it's, you know, it's fatter.
There was a lot of different variations of that kind of stuff.
Well, you know, we came up with the idea, and the beautiful thing was that we knew the town well enough to know there was a need beyond what certain experts told us. But the biggest advantage is had we owned the land.
Yes.
You know, because if we had to go out and find the appropriate space for it, we never would have been able to do it.
And I want to delve into that for a second because right now we have a lot of officials from around the state, local government officials that come in and they want to take a look at our community and say, how did you get it done? And one of the biggest hurdles that they have is that they don't own property where they want to site a community center. And that tends to be the first stumbling block. It's because of the value of land and depending upon where they want to locate it to do that. Fortunately for us, meaning the town government and the town residents, we already owned the land.
Well, long before my time, somebody was wise enough to envision that we could have if not a real downtown, a core center of town.
Government civic
area. Right, and control some of the key areas, key pieces of property. So that, we couldn't have done it, you know, without that. And you can see now a vision that's been decades in the making come into play with the community center and how it ties into where we're sitting right now in the TV studio and the library and the senior center. And you know, behind us we have athletic fields and we have Kanakamak Middle School and the Witherspoon Park, and it all kind of ties in. And you know, we'll talk about in a minute like where we go next, because where we go next is really exciting. But you know, again, how we got there, we came up with this idea, but there was a lot of opposition to it. You know, people.
Yes, there was.
There were a lot of people who were very concerned about the cost. There were a lot of, you know,
as well as we were.
Right, but I mean, I'll say, you know, you know, one of the beauties of not running for office is you can say, you know, what's on your mind. Like old people can say what they want, what they think, because they've lived long enough. There were a lot of people that were certainly just political opportunists who opposed the community center or aspects of the community center because it suited their own political, you know, purpose. And so it was challenging to overcome that. And one of the commitments that we made early on was we're not going to build a project that we're then going to bill you for. You're going to see it in your tax bill. The taxes or your taxes are going to go up, and it's going to be paid for in that manner. And that really imposed, you know, that kind of discipline, that kind of fiscal discipline that we set for ourselves in the very beginning, is that we're going to build this thing the right way, but we're going to also not bill the taxpayer for doing it. Made it difficult to do. We could have easily done this decades earlier and just passed the cost along to the residents, and that would have been it. It would have been there and been done. But we stuck to the principle that we set early on of doing it in a fiscally responsible way. And, you know, it took redevelopment of the town. You know, at the time we ran into the hurdles we ran into. It sounds boring, but there was a recession.
Yes.
You know, the economy tanked, and we
went through 2 recessions.
Right. We went through 2 recessions. We also had, you know, Piscataway, and one of the problems that you and I had to tackle early on when we came in, you know, to office was this town's tax base. You know, it sounds boring. Like, where's the money come from? Yeah. that runs the town. You know, a well-run town, the majority of the money comes from other than the homeowners, other than the residents, and that's how it always had been. But it had been a telecommunications town, as you know, growing up. It had been AT&T and Bellcore and Bell Labs and Telcordia, and these huge taxpayers in these huge office buildings. That was dying out, and there needed to be a new way of reinventing the town. So we were losing, and then there were factories
that were closing.
That closed. So we had to have a way to pay for all those things, and you know, we worked hard, and you worked extremely hard in bringing new businesses to town, and now we have a small manufacturing base that's successful. You know, we have these logistics centers, which, you know, people complain about, but they want to buy things on the internet. That's where they come from, and you know, they're well thought out, and they bring a tremendous amount of money into local communities. You know, and nothing's without controversy, but I mean, you have to have money to run a town, and so we were able to eventually raise the money. The biggest hurdle, really, in getting the project going was that we struck a deal early on with the Department of Transportation.
Yes, one of the best deals ever.
Right, is that they were going to, you know, the long-awaited, it goes back to when your father was involved in local government 50 years ago, the long-awaited reconstruction of the Route 18 project, which people see the road and they think, wow, the road's paved, it's beautiful, but there's lots of infrastructure underneath the road. You know, there's water management that's underneath the road that affects the community center there, and that was millions of dollars. If we had to do the drainage and the infrastructure surrounding the community center, that was, you know, required.
The cost would have went.
Yeah, so we made a deal that the state was going to do it. When they did the highway, they would set us up with a perfect site, so to speak, to build the community center, and that got delayed for quite some time for legitimate reasons, and then
Hurricane Sandy hit.
Well, Hurricane Sandy hit and Hurricane Christie hit at the same time. Again, I'm free. I can say what I want. The governor decided to stop the project at one point in time.
Yes.
You know, his reasoning was that there were other priorities in you know, the bridge going into Jersey City and other priorities that needed to be done. I'm not sure in retrospect that's entirely correct, but we sat for a long time with nothing done. Many residents will remember it was literally under construction. There were barrels, and you know, one day guys are working and they left. They weren't there. It was probably maybe a year.
Yep, at least
of just sitting around waiting, and so that dramatically increased the community center time to be built. And there were a lot of people who, even some of the early supporters, just didn't believe we would ever get it done. And couldn't do it, or that we never were intending to do it, or
at one point I remember getting a call from somebody, well, I want my $150 brick money back.
Yeah, we had a few people that you know, I
said, you already put it on your taxes.
Right, yes. There were some people that well, they just thought it'll never happen.
Yeah.
And you know, if you sat down and explained to somebody what the constraints were, the fiscal constraints, and the box we had drawn for ourselves to work in, that we weren't going to tax the residents, along with the economic conditions and then the Route 18 conditions, people understood. Because we wanted to do it right. You know, we could have built a small facility, but now we built a giant facility, and it's already needs more space because it's incredibly popular. You know, one of the things I remember most, and you and I laugh about it all the time, is that we had we went to a meeting with a bunch of consultants from the National YMCA, and they saw what we wanted to do, and they had all kinds of charts and graphs and statistics, and they told us, this won't work in your town. You don't have the demographics, there wouldn't be the interest, and they showed us some kind of a zigzaggy chart, and you and I poo-pooed that and said, if you build it, they will come. And you know, now if you go there, if you go there right now, you know, it's the morning and there'll be seniors there. If you go there later on, there'll be kids after school. The teen center is extremely popular. the gym is popular, the pool, you know, and it's a real gathering space for different generations and different groups of people.
So right now, we are in the process of acquiring some of the properties around the community center,
Right.
as you know, which we'll be closing on them, and that is for, at some point, maybe in the future, another expansion component adjacent to the community center. And
Right.
we're thinking down the road, we don't know what the needs are going to be, but at least we'll have the land now to do whatever township's going to need in the future.
Right, yeah, again, owning the land around it is critical. So, you know, we can find a sensible way to expand it. But again, and I won't be on township government, but I'm confident that you and my colleagues are going to do it right and do it responsible, not just, build some gold-plated.
No, there's
thing.
there's definitely a need for some other components out there, but it's a question is where you get the money now to fund it
Right.
and to do it correctly like we did the first time, even though it took a while, so to speak, but we were looking at the long run. So you're involved in the community center. One of the other projects that you're involved in, obviously, is the ecological park.
Right. That's the, if I had one thing that I'm disappointed I won't be there to be on the council when it's completed is the ecological park, the old, Halper property.
Yeah.
And it's coming soon. That, again, has been delayed by environmental issues. When we got involved in that, nobody really understood just how contaminated parts of the property were from the way it had been used over the years. And you cannot have a park where kids are playing where there's contaminants buried in the soil. And there's been lots of litigation over who's responsible
Over the
for
years,
that.
but a lot of it's come to
Right.
come
But
to conclusion.
the park, one of the beautiful things is, and I drive by the property every day, is that it's naturally reforested itself to a large degree. So speaking with Henry Hinderstein, who works on staff here, he's our,
Landscape
does our
architect.
landscape architecture work, and many of the beautiful things you see around town and parks or concepts he created has some great concept ideas for making it a real natural nature park. It's not going to be lights and grandstands. That's not what it's going to be. It's going to be a nature park. I don't know how the final plans are, but I know we're talking about a dog park, a
Yes.
community garden, walking trails. There's about 80.
You might be able, by the way, the design, you'd be able to have your 5K races out there.
Right. It's a great piece of property that, again, has to be designed not just for what it would be used for today, but what Henry's trying to envision is how is it going to be used a decade or 2 decades or 5 decades from now? What's it going to look like? What we plant, how will it grow in? How will the community change? So it's really exciting. I mean, it's going to be. It's going to really transform.
Well, I just want to let the record know Councilman Cahn is an active runner.
Not as active as I
Well,
was 22 years ago.
Yeah, between you and your family, just
Right.
you and your wife, you're active runners.
Yeah, she's been running a lot more than me lately. But I look forward to running in the. I've run in the community center, but I look forward to running in that park soon.
Yeah, and I envision it, with, it's 1.5 miles in circumference, that would fit the bill a couple times around for a 5K, but, it's a more safer venue to have it. Like, for instance, they had the Fireman's Run recently
Right.
that ended at the community center, and I know you were out there and things like that, but, I can envision more events like that happening in a much larger venue town,
Right.
and it is sort of will be one of the central focal points there.
Right. Good morning, I'm Steve Cahn. I'm the councilman from the 3rd Ward in Piscataway. We're here at the Piscataway Community Center for the fire department's first annual, hopefully they're going to keep doing it, 5K run walk. We got a great day. We got a big turnout. Lots of folks here from town.
So basically, this event is to help fundraise for the local fire departments. As you know, we're all volunteer. There's 6 fire companies in town. And we also try to now go and tie this in after the race with fire prevention stuff for the little kids. So that's really helps us. All the money helps. We're all a nonprofit. So the money we raise helps us pay for our heating of our firehouses, other activities we do to train. So that's what this event is really for, to help us fundraise.
Good morning, everyone. All right. Well, it's a great day for the first Piscataway Fire Department 5K. And it's even better when you can combine it with a health and wellness campaign. So, supporting your local volunteer fire departments and health and wellness is a win-win, right? Yay! So I want to thank everybody for coming out this morning. Thank you to all the volunteer fire companies that give to us in and out 24/7, all of their personal time for no pay. So we're here today to support the Piscataway Fire Department volunteers. So thank you to them. On your mark. Get set. Get set.
Yeah, that was a great 5K. It was tiring, it was humbling, but
Fun experience, man.
fun experience, yeah.
Definitely.
It's a great day. People are having fun out there, runners, walkers. It's a great community event. It's what we envisioned when we planned and built the community center. It's a place for folks to come together. It's a good sense of community, and I think you see a good example of that here today. Thanks. Now I got to drink some water.
Considering it was the first year, definitely a good turnout. Next year, let's get it even bigger.
We're gonna get it even bigger every year.
Let's do it, yeah.
P-Way.
Okay, so we have first place going to Brian. Then we have second place going to Will. And third place going to Chris. Thanks, guys.
It's really important for the fire departments to be in touch with the communities, so we could come out here and have a good event with everybody, see everybody's faces, and it helps us fund little in-house things and fund the fire department, but most of these proceeds will be going to making next year bigger and better.
So basically, we're going to probably have a run next year. We're going to use the same company that we're going to be using on Split Second, and you can just type in a Piscataway Fire Prevention 5K race. And if anyone else wants to just help out the volunteer firehouses, we're always looking for more members, and we need more members. That's what we stress. We always need new people. You could consider it is you have your normal job during the day, and when you come home, then you're a fireman, So we're always looking for more volunteers because it's a fully volunteer fire department in town. A lot of people think we're paid, but we're fully volunteer. So without the volunteers, we don't have a firehouse, so we're always stressing, we're always looking for more people. You can join at 16 years old. All your training's paid for by the firehouses and everything. So we're always looking for more people. I can't stress that enough.
Now, I want to switch gears. I know you worked very closely with Senator Smith on the River Road Route 18 with the truck ban, and there's still some critics out there that you'll still occasionally see trucks, but there are those critics who ran against you in the 2018 primary that said that, oh, the council members were just doing it because they live in that corridor, but what they're not understanding, you have a good chunk of the town that lives in that corridor, and I thought that was a real political cheap shot, quite frankly.
Well, we also banned trucks at the same time on North Randolph-Hill Road,
Yeah.
completely opposite side of town.
Yeah.
The truck ban took a long time to get in place. What pushed us over the finish line is me and you, along with Senator Smith, went down and met with the commissioner of the DOT.
Diane
We had a
Scicchetti.
private meeting in her office. We brought maps and data, and I wasn't sure we'd be successful. She was tremendous. She listened to what we had to say. The one advantage we had is that she went to Rutgers and was familiar with the town and the road. And some of her advisors were telling her, you can't do it. There'll be litigation, there'll be problems. I can remember there was some gentleman there that threw a lot of hurdles up, but she had faith in what we wanted to do, and she signed off on it. And the freeholders, now they're the commissioners, Commissioner Director Rios was a champion of that as well. And can't thank them enough. It's been tougher to enforce it than we thought. When we had the cameras in place, when the law was different and we could ticket on camera surveillance, which we no longer can do. That was very controversial. The vast majority of residents in New Jersey didn't want it, understandably why, but if it was still in place and we had the ability to ticket trucks based upon filming them, you would see almost no trucks on the road. The fact of the matter is we just don't have the police manpower to police the road 24 hours a day. I don't know the statistics, but the chief has told me on a couple of occasions we write a tremendous amount of summonses, but there's still there's still trucks that use the road.
Yeah. So you were also involved in the Metlar House Museum, a long time there.
This is one of the first events that we get to really showcase ourselves. People see the pool, they see the gym, they see the wellness opportunities that we have. If you don't, please take advantage of that tour that the mayor and myself are willing to walk you around for. You want to be a part of your community center. You want to be a part of what we're doing here. But this is that next phase. That next phase of bringing community together. Events like this. There is not another YMCA, there is not another community center in all of Jersey, and I would venture to guess across the nation, that has such an impact on what we do. We'd never be able to host an event like this. And the fact that you've been willing to come out here and be a part really means a lot to me.
We're lucky here in Middlesex County and Piscataway that we have Frank Cahn representing us. Thank you for all the service members that do, your staff, especially Matt, your chief of staff, working with the museum for the grant writing and appreciate it.
So now I don't know if anybody's driven by the Metlar House now. You tell where the township had awarded a contract to start the site work for the addition for the Metlar House.
Yeah, the Metlar House is a great treasure. Most people have never been to it. Some people have told me they don't even know where it is. They should go see it. June does a great job running the place. You know, almost all volunteers who, it's a nonprofit who raise money to keep the museum in place, but it's a great place that honors, you know, the colonial history of the town.
No, and then this is the first phase that's happening, and then hopefully next year we'll be able to have all the money together to put the actual construction for the addition.
Yeah, I mean, it's a slow process. Surprisingly, you know, there's no federal big grant money and things like that. It's a lot of small donors and activity.
And the other thing is that you just can't have any general contractor go in and bid on the job. They actually have to be certified by the State Historical Commission in order to bid on the project when it goes out to bid.
You know, we should thank our volunteer firefighters in town because years ago there was a tremendous fire.
It was 2005, I believe
right.
it was the fire.
And I happened to be away on vacation. I wasn't even in town.
Yeah.
But we nearly lost the entire building. And I know many of the guys I've talked to that were there. It was a real serious fire. There was a gas line that had come loose and was kind of feeding it. And these guys went in there and risked their neck to save the building.
And I remember them pulling out things out of the building, you know, that of significance of the collection that was there. So, yeah, that was a tough night for the museum advocates there. Yeah. But bound it back, and we're moving forward again. You also were the chair of for a number of years of the finance committee over there, and things have really changed over years where, you know, through all the economic development had allowed the town to really start to take care of some things that should have been taken care of, but we just didn't financially have it, because people have to remember you have a very large community and not everybody can afford an increase in their taxes. For some people who may be working 2 jobs or have a good, reasonable income coming in.
You know, when I got on the town council, I learned very quickly, I don't know anything about how municipal finances work. I took a class at Rutgers for municipal officials, and then I took another class at the Blaustein School on municipal finance, and that's where they teach you all the secrets of how municipal finance works. We've been lucky. We've had over the years and have a great CFO, but that has been an interesting job. You know, there were times during the recession where we didn't have money. We had no money coming in. We had a shrinking tax base, and we had to really sweat out some difficult budgets. But, you know, due to, I think, great planning on your part, we've got a strong tax base. A lot of towns in New Jersey are really suffering.
Yes.
They don't have the money.
You know what, when the pandemic hit and everything was shut down, I remember speaking with you and the finance director and the administrator that you knew we were going to get hammered with tax appeals from the businesses and stuff, so we automatically went in and scaled it back right before the tax bills were to go out, and I think that's what saved the town financially. Whereas other towns like Bridgewater and Company, they were bonding out for operating expenses. You know, a town sort of our same size along 287,
right? And
we were the only town in this area that didn't have furloughs or layoffs. For during the pandemic, and which.
Well, I'll say, with the exception of the mayor of Woodbridge, who is a finance guy, you probably know municipal finance better than any mayor in New Jersey. You really know the budget. When we sit down and go through the budget, you know it as well as the CFO, and that's a tremendous advantage to the residents in the town, because you get a lot of mayors, you know, they have no real background in that, and they make poor decisions. But you jumped on you saw what was going to happen with the pandemic economically and jumped on it before any of us really thought about that.
And all the other towns were begging the state to come in and help them, where we were sort of self-sufficient.
So that reminds me, for some reason just jumped into my head of another story. So I took your seat. You were a sitting second ward councilman. You were sworn in as the mayor on January 1st, 2022. I then took your seat shortly thereafter.
2001.
2001. Did I say
yeah.
22?
Yeah, we're dating
yeah.
ourselves.
So, of course, what happened in 2001 was 9/11.
Yeah.
I'll never forget when 9/11 happened, as most people will not. Once we all shut down work and we realized what was going on, I instinctively came to town hall, figuring, well, I'm a councilman. There's got to be something for me to do. So I pulled up into the parking lot. You had just pulled into the parking lot. Now this is the chaotic morning hours where nobody really knows what in the heck's going on. And before I could even ask you two words, we had a bunch of fighter jets zipped right over our heads, like roared over our heads, heading towards New York City. And that was a real sense that this is really real, and something is really going on here. And I'll never forget. And again, this was a great learning experience for me. I'd been in the Marine Corps. I'd been overseas. I'd had command experience. I thought I was pretty knowledgeable. One of the first things that you thought of was we went in and we met with the chief of police and other key officials. The first thing you thought of is make sure we have proper security at the mosque.
Yes.
That was one of the first things you thought of, is to make sure we take care of our residents, that we don't have any kind of a problem. And it wasn't even something I would have even been thinking of in the chaotic situation. But you really, I commend you, were clear-headed enough to immediately think of protecting our residents.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a trying time, and I got to tell you, every day, as you know, being a councilman or myself as mayor, is a learning experience. And when you learn from experience, you tend to get better government out there for the residents.
Well, there were no shortage of hurdles. You had
No.
Sandy. You had we started off at 9/11, like in the first year that you were mayor.
2 economic implosions, the one in 2009.
Right.
A litany of there, but we are in a lot better financial shape than what we were, and that's why, as much as that there's some armchair critics out there, that we always have to constantly looking forward over what the revenue stream is for the town. I mean, is everything perfect? No, but at the end of the day will people still be able to stay in their homes, have a roof over the head, and reasonably live? Because you have a lot of seniors out there, you have a lot of families who may be taking it on the chin during the COVID economy, and this whole general area has changed the economy, as you know, being a lawyer, seeing with the professions, and you got to really think out of the box now, and you just can't say no to everything.
Right. Well, again, what I've learned is local government really works. I mean, there's no shortage of critics out there. That's just part of the American fabric, is that to criticize and complain, and that's part of democracy. But the vast majority of people in this town love the town, love the community, love what's going on in town. People always want this and want us to do something differently, and I'd be the last one to say everything that municipal government's done in the last 20 years has been perfect or correct. It hasn't been, but I think I'm proud of the fact that we've really all tried to work to make the town a better place, and to improve the lives of the residents in town. And if you look at where things were financially, we were on pretty shaky ground 20 years ago. Not just the parks needed major work, the roads were a disaster. The Possumtown area took a long time to fix. Again, we have, I don't know the exact number.
We have probably
a lot
about
of miles of road.
400 miles long, but we also have we could spend about $400 million, which obviously we don't have, to reinvent the town. And we're one of the few towns, I know we only have a couple minutes left, but I know we're only one of the few towns that's actually spending, $8 to $9 million a year rebuilding the roads the correct way, not just the mill and overlay. Right. We're actually doing it correctly to make sure everything has handicap accessible, so people can more walk. Under your tutelage, we've installed more bike lanes in the history of the town.
Right, and there's more to come.
And then there's more to come.
We've also, fixed countless sidewalks.
Yes.
And unlike many towns, we don't charge you to come out and fix your sidewalk.
No.
Many towns. I remember talking to a guy who had moved to town from someplace else, and he was complaining to me about his sidewalk, and we were standing there looking at his sidewalk, and he wanted to know he wanted to know if we would do it, And he said, yes, we'll get it done. And then he wanted to know what it was going to cost him, you know. And when I told him, well, we don't do that, he said where he lived, you know, where he grew up, you know, the town billed you for doing all that work. And I said, no, this is Piscataway. We don't do that.
Yeah. So with that, I think what we're going to do is we're going to close out the show, but more importantly is we will have in the future Councilman Cahn, when he's a civilian, back on to talk about a book that he wrote. And we'll get to that, and we could be more than happy after January to have him on.
Coming out this week.
You could say the name of the book.
Well, it's a book about a cousin of mine who played professional baseball. His name was Sid Gordon. He played for the New York Giants in the 40s and 50s and was involved in a lot of critical issues, a lot of social issues of the day. He and Jackie Robinson worked together pretty closely.
And we're not going to steal away from when he comes back on the show. So on behalf of myself and the township governing body, Steve, I want to thank you for all the years of service in the countless meetings and time away from your family that you've volunteered to the residents of Piscataway. Thank you very much. With that, we will see you in December, and we want to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving. And don't forget, remember, there's the food pantries, fish, and many of the churches in town will be running food drives throughout the month of Thanksgiving month and stuff like that. And don't forget, we do have Santa Claus coming back on in December. So with that, we'll see you in December.
Happy Halloween!